program is dedicated to couples dealing with hemophilia and HIV.
Bonnie and I have been married for a little over 13 years.
I think we both first learned that there was a possibility that he had been exposed to the virus probably 5 years ago.
I volunteered to be tested as part of a research study at the UC Davis Medical Center, and that occurred in July of 1985.
We were both asked at the same time to participate, and I certainly wanted to know if I had been exposed, so that wasn't a problem for me.
Even though I assumed I was positive, when the counselor actually sat me down and said, yes, you are in fact infected, it was devastating. It was literally a real blow. I had a tremendous gut reaction to actually hearing the information.
I decided that, along with the support of my parents and my doctor and my nurse, that it was important for me to be tested so that I could make some appropriate life decisions as far as all sorts of things, just the way you handle yourself with girlfriends, family decisions, all that sort of stuff. I felt it was important for me to know, to have all the information that I could. I walked into the doctor's office pretty much sure that I was going to get a positive result, meaning I was HIV positive. My reaction, as well prepared and as ready as I was for that I thought I was. I walked in there and I still reacted completely different than I thought I was. It was still really hit me.
Julie and I have been married just over 3.5 years.
I was tested for HIV antibody at the same time that Mark was. We participated in a study and we both got the results at the same time.
I decided to be tested for HIV antibodies primarily because I'm the type of person that needs to know that type of thing. I could not live with the uncertainty of knowing whether I was HIV positive or if I wasn't.
Richard and I have been married for 14 years, and we have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy.
At the hospital, they knew that I was positive from 1985, and I did not learn that I was positive until about a year or 2 years afterwards. My initial reaction was that I was very concerned about my children and my wife, and believe it or not, I was concerned about sweat coming off my body, tears out my eyes, saliva out my mouth, the kids eating behind me. I was concerned with anything that I came in contact with and my wife and my children came in contact with. I didn't understand at the time that they would not be affected by just casual touching of things that I touched.
My wife and I have been married, and it seems like forever. She says it's 27 years. I can't remember when we've not been married. The awareness of the fact that I was infected with HIV took place over a long period of time as news came in and people began to understand what AIDS was. There wasn't a test available to us until about 1985 or 1986. But I think before it came time to be tested, we both realized that there was a pretty good chance that test would be positive. I'm not sure, even at the time of the testing, we weren't sure what it meant to be positive for that test. There was a lot of suggestion that only 14 or 20% of people who tested positive would ever get AIDS, and the realization that wasn't true has taken several years to emerge as well.
Patricia and I have been married approximately 5 years now. Don't ask me for a specific date, but going on 5 years. When I first decided that I would be tested, I had several gay friends at the time that strongly urged me to be tested. I, upon learning my test results, became what I would consider now to be very non-communicative. I decided that I didn't want to let the world of AIDS invade my private life, and I therefore decided that I would not talk about it to my wife, and I wanted to keep our relationship as quote-unquote normal as I could. There for a long time there was no communication, and things kind of built up, a lot of anger and resentment and misunderstanding on both sides. In fact, it got so bad that there were several times I considered it might be in the best interest of our marriage to separate and for us to go our separate ways, that it would be easier for me to deal with the aspect of HIV infection alone than it would be to be married. Fortunately, before it reached that particular breaking point, a very good friend of ours, who was also a social worker for the medical center that I myself attend, kind of saw what was going on with my wife and myself. So she, at that point, assessed the situation and was actually able to grab me by the arm and bring me over to my spouse and sit me down and say, look guys, you need to start communicating. You need to bring these things out. You need to talk about HIV infection and what it means to each one of you. You need to communicate about it because I want to see you guys stay together. At that point we talked and we cried and we hugged and that started things.
When we first suspected that Les may have been exposed, or before we were tested, we hadn't done anything different, didn't practice any kind of safer sex.
When we were called in by the treatment center and given our antibody status, Bonnie's response was, forget it, no way, I'm not using condoms, I just won't do it. But as we talked about the possible risk, we, essentially compromised on, beginning to use condoms. In some ways, I think the risk of AIDS kind of motivated us to broaden our sexual horizons, to maybe try new practices, new behaviors that before might have been too threatening, or just things that we hadn't gotten around to including in our sexual repertoire before.
In working with African Americans and Latino community, and the male particularly, I found that it's a masculinity thing to have sex or to have girlfriends and to have relationships. And for them to use protection or try to use safe sex is a way of saying there's something wrong with me. And I find that they have a very hard time trying to use safe sex methods with a lot of the people that they're involved with, because it is a way of making a statement that there's something wrong with me that I don't want to give you. When you face the reality of the situation, if you care and you love someone that you are sharing your life or your body with, I think that you have to care a lot more deeply than just satisfy them. You have to keep them safe.
We used condoms before we were tested, just as a precautionary measure. The physicians had told us to assume that Mark was positive, and just to not allow that risk. There were a few times that we didn't, so when we were tested that was a concern. But since that time, that was right after we were married, we have always used the condom.
This past year I have been much more concerned about transmitting the virus to her. I'm not sure why I have been, but it has been a much greater concern of recent time.
I think the fear of transmission has always been there for the men more than the women. In the support groups that I've been involved in, the women kind of say, oh, that's just part of being married. I've chosen to be married to this person, or to be involved, whichever is the case, and by just choosing that, I've chosen to put myself at risk. It's my choice. No one is forcing me to do that. And so that's kind of been the overall feeling. I think I'm more concerned about transmission and all those kinds of issues. Now, just because of seeing more people die and seeing women die, wives, not just the men.
For us, and I know for many couples that I speak with, condoms have a very negative influence, not so much because of the loss of sensuality, but because of the symbolism of condoms. That at the moment at which, we are sharing something that should be, mindless and just, purely in enjoyment, and that we have to stop and deal with this little thing that we know we must use because of the prospect of, essentially my killing Bonnie through infecting her. And of course, it's a reminder of my possible death due to AIDS as well.
I told Heather I was HIV positive, I think the second day I knew her. Oftentimes, I guess people in general, and me in particular, tell people for a reaction, tell people things, not necessarily just the HIV stuff, but things in general, to see how they react and see how people take things. And right away I knew that I wanted to spend a lot of time with Heather, and so I figured I'd find out right away how she'd handle that. She said, well, I don't know what you want me to say, but I feel like I should just give you a hug. And that was nice.
I made the decision to have sexual relations was a lot of hard thought, and we discussed it endlessly. And I knew I was serious about Rick, so it just kind of went on from there. I knew that if we used condoms, it would be safe sex.
I had to come to grips with the fact that it was really her decision. I should provide her with the best information I could get, and have her read it, and we could talk about it and mull it over and think about it, but in the end it was her decision.
The need to change sexual behavior is just one of the issues important to couples.
One of the biggest issues is being very involved in the hemophilia community. I've seen a number of hemophiliacs become symptomatic and also die of the AIDS virus. And in seeing that, I have a horrible fear of myself wasting away and becoming sick and weak and getting the quote-unquote AIDS look, and also of being, ostracized or shunned from any community or friends or family or whatever. Another big issue regarding AIDS is not being able to plan for the future. It's hard to, like in my business, do I invest in retirement funds? Or do I invest in things that we can do now, for the next year or the next 2 years? Do I have 5 years or do I have 30 years? So that's a big question there. How do I plan for the future? It's so uncertain.
The biggest issue that I always think of when in dealing with this horrible situation is just the future, I guess. And a lot of times I'll worry about it when Mark isn't even symptomatic. And I kind of, hit myself and say, worry about that when the time comes, but it still is always there. It seems like in the last few months I may have gone backward in the way I've been dealing with it, where I may have gotten to the point of almost an acceptance of the whole possibility of Mark dying. Now I'm more back at an anger stage again. So I really kind of fluctuate, and it's not very predictable.
I say the thing that helps me the most is my faith in God, and knowing that my life here on earth is just a temporal thing, and that my eternal life with the Lord is going to be without suffering, without affliction, without pain, without sorrow, without grief, and by knowing that, I can get through the life that I'm living now.
The support groups are great because they just provide the people who have to deal with the HIV issues, the people who have to deal with the sex, the being reminded every time you put on a condom that this is what you're dealing with. You're not alone. I mean, it gives you someone there who you know is going to understand. If you start crying, you know, you don't have to say anything. They know how you feel. You don't have to explain to someone what the sorrow is. You don't have to explain what the stigma is, of kind of being out there all alone if you don't have this group of people. Because a lot of people who don't have to deal with this don't understand.
We have a support group in the area that about 6 women attend on a monthly basis, and it's very beneficial. I mean, it's just a real safe place to talk about whatever you're feeling or thinking or your fears.
It's not an easy thing to deal with openly, so it really helps to have a safe environment, such as, you know, a group of other couples that are going through the same thing.
I was able to go to a for women only seminar where I was able to talk to other wives who are dealing with the same issues that's affecting the Hemophilia Society at the moment. Definitely was worthwhile, and I intend on going to the next support group meeting that they have.
I think AIDS, as far as in the black community, is looked upon, I guess, the way hemophilia is looked upon and a lot of other things, as though it's a white person disease that a black person just happened to have. And I think that a lot of people in the Afro-American and Latino communities look upon medical problems as a low priority. I think that everyone is working and trying just to pay rent and buy food and pay gas and water, that when it comes down to going to treatment centers or places to learn about AIDS and hemophilia stuff, it takes a very low priority.
We live at a distance from the larger hemophiliac community and don't participate very actively in the affairs of the Hemophiliac Society. I think we would like to do that more, but it isn't worth living in a large city to do that.
I meet with one woman who has a problem to do with AIDS. We get together once in a while, but other than that, there is no support system available here.
I think my wife and I have lived together through a lot of things. In the 70s, I was very severely crippled with a lot of problems with knee hemorrhaging and arthritis, which was very debilitating to the extent I was on painkillers a lot and taking tranquilizers and not sleeping well, taking sleeping pills, and really not with it at all. And life was not very good at that time. I think we didn't have much of a relationship at all. I was mostly in bed or sick or cranky, and that was a very hard time. And in the late 70s, the orthopedic procedures became available to us to have the knees replaced, and those knee replacements were very, very important to us. The consequence, I suppose, of those 2 surgeries was the HIV infection through contaminated blood products. I think, though, that if we had to do it over again and we're told that there was a risk of AIDS to replace the knees, I don't think we would have hesitated to change the situation in our lives at that time. The 10 years since those knee replacements have been really good years.
I think for me, the overwhelming issue is loss. And I think that people often think of loss in terms of death and dying, grief and loss. And for me, loss has so many manifestations. There are many things that I have had to give up or have chosen to give up because of the risk of AIDS. So a lot of things that I mourn the loss of. And if I do in fact develop AIDS, I realize that I will give up many more things. I'll give up lifelong ambitions and the recreational activities that I enjoy. And perhaps the greatest loss of all will be the people in my life, especially Bonnie. With the risk of AIDS, I've come to realize that the most important thing in my life is the people in my life. And the hardest thing for me to deal with is the prospect of not only not having them in my life anymore, but also not being part of their life as well.
Chris's wife, Kathy, died of AIDS in 1988.
Kathy was my best friend. Kathy was fiercely loyal. We went through all of our fun and all of our pain together. We were tested for HIV seropositivity about 2 years into our marriage. I was against Kathy and I finding out about the results of the test, but she wanted to know. And she was positive, so if she was positive, obviously I was positive. Kathy was sick for about 2 years before she died. She was initially diagnosed with pneumonia and then had a number of subsequent infections which put her in the hospital and required frequent treatments of antibiotics and other infection control mechanisms. Living with Kathy while she was sick was actually kind of an inspiration for me because she never once complained about her situation. She always took it head on. She was a fighter. About 4 months after she died, I really started coming to grips with what life was going to be like without her. Feeling lonely, very lonely. Feeling guilty, feeling responsible for her illness. Feeling responsible for all the plans that we had made together that will never be done. And I don't want anyone to have to go through what I've had to experience the last 3 or 4 years with this disease. And I have to find a way to stay healthy as long as I can to share this message with everyone I can.
I feel like being HIV positive has affected the way maybe I perceive our relationship or the way that I think it does affect it for me. I think that because I remember one of the first week or two when I was seeing Heather and I was waiting for her to get out of work. I was going to pick her up and I was sitting in the car and I was thinking about, oh, this lady's all right, I'd like to spend some time with her, I think. And that made me, I'm not sure if it made me sad, but I started to cry and I couldn't figure it out and I couldn't stop. And I was sitting there and I was trying to understand why I was so upset about this. I should be happy, right? And I guess when I finally came to terms with it, it was like, do I really want to commit? And that's the big word, I think, for me. Do I really want to commit to somebody? I think I still struggle with it. Do I really want to commit to somebody? And it sounds morbid maybe, but and then leave them.
The biggest thing about me dealing with this HIV positivity is that 9 years down the road, T might not be here for me or with me.
We have made an effort to keep things normal. We don't concentrate on the HIV issue. We don't talk about it every day. We try to keep up with the latest news. If we hear something, we don't go and investigate or try to find out information every day on it. But if we hear something, we pay attention and we speak to the doctors and ask them questions about any new information. We have a family and we try to keep going on as normally as we can.
Many young couples in the hemophilia community are also facing the issue of whether to have children, given the risk of transmitting the AIDS virus. Dr. Bruce Evatt is director of the Division of Immunologic, Oncologic, and Hematologic Diseases at the Centers for Disease Control.
We know that more than 13 to 15% of sexual partners of hemophilia patients have already developed the infection. The National Hemophilia Foundation, the Canadian Hemophilia Society, and public health officials all are in absolute agreement that pregnancy should be delayed, if all possible, until there are better ways to ensure the safety of the mother and potential child.
Dr. John Maudlin cares for pediatric AIDS patients at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center.
The mother is infected with the HIV virus. Her infant, we believe, has somewhere between a 25 and 40% chance of becoming infected with the virus.
What happens to babies born infected with HIV?
And the young infant, it's extremely difficult to diagnose HIV infection because all babies who are born to mothers who are infected will have the mother's antibody in their circulation. The most common signs and symptoms that we see early on are, number one, failure to grow normally. We monitor the signs of illness that a child develops that would lead us to think that the child has HIV infection, and these particular signs of illness would be persistent respiratory infections, persistent gastrointestinal infections, in particular diarrhea, and then fortunately a smaller number of babies is the more ominous harbingers of illness, such as the opportunistic infections that develop.
Les and Bonnie discussed having a child.
Throughout our relationship, Bonnie has expressed a very strong desire, if not a need, to have children. And it's something that I have never really felt that I wanted or needed. It didn't really appeal to me. That has changed over the past couple of years. I think primarily because of the AIDS risk, that I felt that I wanted and needed a positive focus in my life. Also, another motivation has been that I would like Bonnie to have part of me as well in the event that I should develop AIDS and should die from it, that our relationship will go on sort of vicariously through her bond with our offspring. Our decision to have a child and how to go about conceiving was really a very lengthy process, one to which we put a great deal of time and energy. We at no time considered having a child through our conceiving. We felt that the risk of infecting Bonnie and the child was totally unacceptable. So we very carefully explored various means of conception and very seriously considered a number of options, and then eventually resolved that for us, donor insemination was the most acceptable and the most appealing as well. For me, donor insemination still enables Bonnie and I to go through the pregnancy and that whole process appeals to us very much. And also, there, for us, is still the sense, the feeling that it is our child, that because it is part of Bonnie and because of the very deep bonding between Bonnie and I, that it will be our child.
I think that probably all women, mothers, worry about being left alone to raise a child or children on their own. I think with the AIDS risk being part of our life, that reality is more present. I think the thoughts that have been the most painful for me in the thought of raising our child without Les is the significant loss for that child, that Les has so much to offer, that makes me real sad.
I agree with delaying pregnancy. Mark and I have talked about putting me at risk to try, and it's really not even an option for us. It's just that's too much of a fear, and it's not something we would want to deal with, and waiting to find out if I had seroconverted or if the baby had, and I think we don't really feel that would be fair to the infant either.
The best way to sort out the complex and emotional issues of infection with the AIDS virus is to talk about them. Talking strengthens a relationship, although it isn't always easy.
I think the fact that I am HIV positive has drawn us each closer together and has strengthened our communication and our relationship, because even though I'm the one that's HIV positive, we both have to deal with it because we're married and we're a team. And because we have to deal with that, that issue or that burden or that stress, it draws us closer together.
And I would probably immediately say my wife gives me the most support. Just in having an open communication with her and being able to talk and share with her about our daily feelings and about our feelings for the future and about our feelings for the past, and just about living day to day as best and to the fullest that we can.
Beyond the adversity, the problems, and the difficulties in a relationship is really a good, fine, wholesome, healthy relationship that you can form with another person. And a binding do take place, and through HIV, through AIDS, through hemophilia, through whatever bad things may come into our lives. If the relationship is strong, it just seems to get stronger.
Being married for 14 years, as anyone that's been married that long knows, has its ups and downs. And I guess I just look at this as another problem that we have to deal with, and that we'll deal with as well as we deal with everything else in our lives. We have to do what we have to do. We'll be okay. We love each other, and so we'll just support each other.
In my opinion, the most vital means of coping as a couple is communication. And Bonnie and I have always prided ourselves on the communication within our relationship. And the risk of AIDS has made that increasingly more difficult. A lot of times I'm burned out about hearing about AIDS and thinking about AIDS, and I just don't want to deal with it. At times it becomes too frightening to talk about. At times I'm concerned about burdening Bonnie or frightening her, so I don't share my concerns with her. And I'm saddened by that. I really am. I value the communication within our relationship and feel a sense of loss around that issue.
Les and I have always had a very open relationship with one another. There hasn't been much we couldn't talk about, if anything, and this has really pushed real hard against that. It's not easy for Les to discuss his fears. Somehow I think he thinks that protects me So he shuts me out a lot. And I don't know how to deal with that. I don't know how to be shut out. What I've just come to fully realize just in the last week is that it's real important for me to assure Les that I love him, that I'll be there, that I'm not afraid of this disease, that together we'll get through it.
I see a lot of denial about AIDS, even at this late date within the hemophilia community, particularly with couples. And I would just encourage them to, muster the courage to communicate what's going on for them inside.